Good afternoon, everybody, and I think we'll open proceedings right now. I'm Brian Pascoe, the Chief Executive of ICMA. It's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon, and it's a great honor to welcome you in this fantastic auditorium of the Banque de France, who we thank warmly for their very kind hospitality for this event, as well as the highly valued partnership with and the membership of ICMA over many years. And I would like to thank Ellie in particular for his support and engagement with ICMA. I'd also like to extend a specific thanks to our very own Valérie Guillaumin for helping to bring this event together. Characteristically, Valérie has worked extremely hard without wanting to put herself at the center of attention. So I'd like specifically to acknowledge her outstanding contribution to the process, but also to the work that ICMA does in France and beyond more broadly. So thank you very much, Valérie. And so briefly, for those of you who do not know ICMA, we are the leading international trade association in the fixed income markets, headquartered in Zurich, with offices in London, here in Paris, Brussels, and Hong Kong. And our agenda covers all topics related to the debt capital market, repo, sustainable finance, and fintech and digitalization. We currently have over 610 members in 70 jurisdictions globally, and for more than 50 years, ICMA has made a significant contribution to the development of the international capital market by facilitating the interaction between all participants, including issuers, intermediaries, investors, central banks, infrastructure providers, law firms, credit rating agencies, fintech firms, consultancies, and others. And our ultimate mission, effectively, is to provide effective advocacy with key regulators and stakeholders on behalf of our members, and symbiotically to set standards for best practice across the entire industry. Embedded very directly into the fabric of this afternoon's event and the very important 10th anniversary of the Paris Accord, ICMA plays a recognized leading role in supporting the development of sustainable finance in the bond and the wider capital market. In addition to active regulatory engagement and thought leadership, we provide the Secretariat for the principles which are the de facto global issuance standard for the international sustainable bond market. 2023, 97% of all issuance referenced the ICMA principles. And indeed, as we all know, sustainable bond issuances in their various forms have become a firm and growing mainstay of the capital market in the last 5 to 10 years. And it's extremely poignant, given where we are today and the noise that surrounds us on an hourly basis, to reflect at this event on whether the debt capital market is actually delivering on its commitment to meet the climate goals, and indeed whether and how it can fulfill its full potential, given the critical role the bond market must play looking forward ahead to meet the overarching Paris objectives. Switching tack slightly and looking at some of the other important areas of ICMA activity, we're also well known for our important transversal social networks. Firstly, the ICMA Women's Network, the IWN, which is particularly active and well developed in Paris under the leadership of Caroline Derocle of Euroclear. And secondly, the ICMA Future Leaders engagement, which is designed to benefit the younger generation of capital market professionals in ICMA's membership. And Alina Schaptefratz of Euronext Paris is the IFL representative for the region and will lead a panel discussion later on. We're also very active in education and training, it plays a major part in our mission to raise standards and knowledge in the international capital market. And we train staff from the regulatory and central banking community, as well as a wide variety of other market participants on a global basis. And this is particularly important as a focus area for ICMA at a time when boosting financial literacy and the understanding of financial markets in Europe is critical to deliver on one of the most important pillars of the Capital Markets Union, which is to drive greater inclusion of retail and individual investors in capital markets and to mobilize savings more productively. And in recognition of this, ICMA Education and Training continues to expand with new courses on market infrastructure, asset management, and the sustainable bond markets, and AI in capital markets now, in addition to providing in-house bespoke courses for our members. So back briefly, and by closing, to the bigger picture, we operate through a regional structure to convene the interests of our members, and that currently comprises 16 regions in total across the globe. And today's event has been organized by the France and Monaco region, led by Jean-Luc Lamarck, who's the Managing Director, Chairman, Primary Credit at Crédit Agricole CIB. And I'm delighted to say that under Jean-Luc's stewardship, ICMA's France and Monaco region is one of our most active and engaged regions globally, with 33 members and extremely strong representation on ICMA's board and across all our major committees. And so with that, I'd like to hand the floor to Jean-Luc for his opening remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I will try not to repeat everything that Brian just said, right? Even though we've been prepared by Valérie. So a big thank to Valérie, that she's doing a tremendous job all year long, not only today. And a big thank to Banque de France and Elie, because Elie managed each and every year to get this place for us, and it's always a very big and successful event. So on behalf of the committee, I've got three co-chairs, Ibrahima Kobar here, Elie Levy that I just mentioned, and obviously Marc Etienne who is going to be, Sebia who is going to be on the stage a little bit later on. We hope you're gonna enjoy the evening, and we've got very prestigious speakers which are sitting just in front of me, and I'm sure there will be a lot of interest there. We are familiar with organizing a very good event, I believe. In 2022, we organized in this very same place the same conference, but on digitalization of debt markets, and more specifically blockchain. 2023, there was a major event. That was the AGM, which took place in Palais Brognard, very prestigious place, and that was probably the best attended AGM of ICMA over the last 2 decades. Last but not least, certainly the Women Network and the Future Leaders are both extremely active in Paris, in France. We are very pleased, and we're very dynamic people. The chair, I see people here sitting. I haven't seen Caroline there. She will be, she's on her way she's chairing the ICMA network, so it's very prestigious and very dynamic. And I'm told by Valérie to remind everybody that the Women Network is welcoming men. I attended a few events several times. I'm still alive. So please don't hesitate to join. On that one, I will simply give the floor to Elie for the next.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you, Valérie. I will not repeat what Jean-Luc and Valérie said. Just to be short, first of all, I'm truly delighted to welcome you this evening at Banque de France. It's also the result, as Brian mentioned, of our strong collaboration since many years now, and it's a very good thing. As you may know, for this conference team, sustainable finance is a critical topic for Banque de France for many years, because climate change is a major source of economic and financial risk. Okay, I prepared some elements very long. Let's get short. First, in our strategic plan, we have 5 big actions that are dedicated to preparing our institution to this transition. The first is adapt monetary policy operation to climate risk. Second, increase the awareness of climate risk by the financial sector. Third, assess all climate risk in the Banque de France scoring of companies, because that's one of our mission. Fourth, actively commit to carbon neutrality. And 5, aim for digital sobriety in all of our uses. Second, I will highlight, if you don't know it, that we publish now our sustainability report that includes all Banque de France financial and non-financial reporting in the single publication. In terms of responsible investments, that's very in-depth analysis, all the carbon metrics and so on. And third, as you may know, Banque de France was among the first to act in encouraging all the community of central bank and supervisors in these issues. And Banque de France hosts the Secretariat of the Network for Greening the Financial System since 2017. These networks gather now, I turn to Yann Marin, that will certainly tell you more about the mission during the panel, but gathered 143 central banks and 21 observers, if I'm not mistaken. Let me present you briefly the structure of this conference. It is organized around two panels. The first one will consider the role of policy makers and central banks in the development of the sustainable finance. It will be moderated by Nicolas Pfaff. And the second panel will address the question whether the debt capital market delivering on its commitments. It will be moderated by Tanguy Claquin. In between, we have the privilege to listen to three distinguished keynote speakers. The first one is Laurence Breton, Managing Director at the European Climate Foundation. The second is Bernard de Longevial, Global Head of Sustainable Finance at S&P Global Ratings. I should mention also that S&P sponsor the cocktail afterwards. Then thank you very much. And third, Cecilia Tam, the head of the Energy Investment Unit at the International Energy Agency. And as Brian mentioned, it's really important for the ICMA and for our actual world, actually, but we have also invited three young women from the ICMA Future Leaders Network to come on stage and share with us their views and experience about climate, diversity, and future generation. First, I would like to give the floor to Laurence Breton to give us a general introduction on the subject. Laurence has joined the European Climate Foundation in October 2021 as Chief of Staff and became Managing Director in July 2022. Laurence has gathered more than 26 years of experience in international development with a particular expertise of area of sustainable development and climate change. Then, Laurence, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you, really, for that kind introduction, and thank you for ICMA for the invitation to address tonight. I'm really happy to see we are not yet in the cancel culture in this arena. And I'm really honored to replace Laurence Toubiana, who I think addressed already in this crowd and is away right now, so could not attend, but she's also really happy that we could actually exchange on climate. So for those who may not know, the European Climate Foundation is a major philanthropic initiative working to foster the net zero transition. So our work with support over 700 partner organizations, mainly from civil society, but also research center, think tank, to drive progress towards the goals of Paris Agreement and promote practical policy making, but also try to broaden the political and public support for climate actions. So we have several programs, among which one is shifting climate systems. So we see we have, a large ambition. And Morgan Després, actually a former representative of that illustre maison and former chairman of the NGFS, is leading that finance work. So this year marks 10 years since the Paris Agreement was reached. At that time, it was a moment of hope. Well, we have known some up and down in the climate battle, so we're used to that. So, well, let's face it, we might say we are in a down. So, but it's really, we've been there. So we still have some hope, but we think it's a good moment to take stock of what happens in then and to look at facts, because right now there are a lot of noise, around a lot of things, but what are the facts? So the first headline is, well, we have made some really good progress in fighting climate crisis in the last 10 years. Today, 107 countries covering 82% of global emissions have now made commitment to set net zero emissions. Paris Agreement, so far, let's see how it goes, but have become a reference point for activist social movements and some economic parts to hold the government to account. Well, as you know, it's still not enough. We know there are some sort of climate fatigue, I heard that, but I'm sorry, but physics is a bit stubborn. So on the current trajectory, we headed for 2.6 to 3.1 warming by 2100, which is based on UNEP 2024 emission gap report. Global emissions look likely to peak in the next few years because there are really interesting trends in some major emitters, but they need to start falling rapidly. So Paris plus 10 is not just a symbolic moment. As you may know, there are some expectations for country NDC, which is a renew of the ambition of their transition, and we are just 25 years away from 2050. So we face the challenge of accelerating the real climate action in an increasingly difficult concept. That's an euphemism: political, geopolitical, and economical. But the impact of climate change are sadly worse than 10 years ago. I'm just coming back from the Finance in Common Summit that had place in Cape Town, and I just would like to quote the Gouverneur of Banque de France, M. Villeroy de Galhau, that stated that there won't be any development growth without climate transition. Even though some people try to say the contrary, there won't be any more growth, sustainable growth, I mean, in the long term, if there is no climate transition. That's a reality. So 2024 was the first year to cross the 1.5 warming threshold, and every year there are more wildfire, heat waves, floods, tropical storm, etc. I'll come back in a minute in the kind of economic impacts of those. So 10 years ago, it was impossible. It was possible to stick your head in the sand, but today, I guess it's becoming really difficult to ignore, despite all this information. So. What can we do? And we do have reason to believe, to be cautiously and without being naive, optimistic. Why is it so? First, the improving economics, real economics of climate action. And these have drastically changed since the Paris Agreement has been agreed. There's still a long way to go to align financial flow with the Paris Agreement. 6.5 trillion per year is needed by 2030 compared to current annual investment of 1.5. In 2023, 1.7 was invested in clean energy for every one invested in fossil fuel. But this is really a progress compared to the 2020 ratio, which was 1 for 1. But there are significant economic momentum for the transition. Key green technology have matured. Renewables and battery are getting cheaper every year. The average cost of PV solar projected fell by 85% between 2010 and 2020. Average battery costs have fallen by 90% since 2010, and over 250 electric cars were sold every week in 2023, more than the numbers sold in the whole year of 2013. So our perception of costs and benefits of climate actions have totally shifted significantly. I remember when we were in Cape Town last week, we were laughing because I've been, as Ellie was mentioning, for many years. Not sure we had to need to the precise account, but for many years in the international finance and development finance. And actually, when we had that conversation in the same area 10 years ago about the solar price, everybody was laughing. That's not going to be possible. Now, well, there is no need, absolutely no need of public investments for solar and for batteries. So there is no, and actually an intense green industrial race. China invested 890 billion in renewables infrastructure in 2023, and green expansion, main driver of Chinese GDP growth, actually. Biden inflation reduction act catalyzed record investment in the US. And despite whatever is said today, the US itself will be the biggest loser of the change of the direction under the new administration. And despite all what is being said, don't be fooled. The kind of war against raw material is because of the green transition. So the EU has a big opportunity to attract investment and talent with a new clean industrial deal. The economic logic of the transition makes it unlikely that others will follow the US in leaving the Paris Agreement. Well, that may be more hope, but they still have dynamic to, and we've seen that also in some withdrawing in some of the banks, US bank, for example, in the net zero islands. Some of them, actually most of them so far, have just withdrawn from the alliance officially, but they have confirmed that they committed to some of their climate ambition. So aligning the private sector, of course, in that there are still work to do, and we count on you. There's still much to do to align the private sector. We are seeing the limits of voluntary commitment. GFENS, NZBA have not lived up to their expectation, and there is a really strong anti-ESG investment backlash, and no, unfortunately, coming in the kind of EU. But we should not forget there has been a major shift in the last 10 years. And I'd like here to actually mention the critical role that insurance and reinsurance industry have done and could become, because they are becoming more and more vocal. In 2023, the global natural disaster, I'm sorry, I have many numbers, but sometimes we have to go back to facts to look at reality. It was 380 billion in economic loss, the climate impact, with only 31% of that covered by insurance. So the protection gap is expecting to increase as more properties, areas, and businesses are becoming uninsurable. And we see that in the US, that some insurance start to officially drop the capacity to insure. So this poses major policy dilemma. Who steps in as insurer of last resort? And how do we have to manage the risk to maintain some financial stability? Top insurance companies suffered 10.6 billion of climate-attributed loss last year, just slightly less than the 11.3 billion of direct premium they underwrote from commercial fossil fuels clients. Central banks are increasingly factoring climate risk, transition and physical, into their approach to monetary policy and financial stability. And the Network for Greening the Financial System, launched in 2017, now has 142 members, over 90 countries. And the fact that all of you are here today give great encouragement that the financial sector cares. So international climate finance, just to mention here, also a growing initiative that actually ECF is entering the Secretariat about the Global Solidarity Levy. Between now and 2030, developing countries will need to mobilize 2.4 trillion annually to fight climate change. So mobilizing this finance is a huge challenge, especially in the context for, I'm not sure even the account is right, but just for this year, ODA has dropped by 31 billion. Post-US, UK, French, and German announcement of reduced their international finance for development. So there are a lot of work on the way to reform the international finance architecture, to lower capital costs for green projects, to adjust the mandates of operation of the World Bank and the IMF and some other multilateral banks, and to find solution of the debt and liquidity crisis that preventing investment in sustainable development. There are a lot of dynamic also to embark domestic resource and local development, and to embark, for example, public development banks, and which actually, if we sum up the global investment for the public development banks, that accounts for 10% of the worldwide investment. So there are catalysts way that these public banks could play. The green guarantee companies aim to mobilize up to 5 billion for climate mitigation and adaptation program. So these reform and initiatives are crucial, but we know they won't be alone close the climate finance gap I was mentioning. So we need bold policies to mobilize additional public resource. So there are a strong case for new progressive tax. And I guess also the context today is opening a window for that, because when you mention the word tax, usually you don't receive a warm welcome, geopolitical welcome. But there's been this proposal at a summit by France and Kenya and Barbados to bear this Global Solidarity Levy initiative. ECF is holding the Secretariat on behalf of the country. And the principle is super clear. It's to apply a polluter pay principle, and just not to reinvent the wheel, but just to make sure some existing tax could be actually top up. So today we are looking after a few different options that's going to be clarified, but this initiative is getting more and more support, and that could be actually driving really substantial money at the country level. So if we take the example of a $5 per ton of CO2 extraction fee on fossil fuel could raise an estimated 216 billion per year. A global 2% wealth tax on billionaires, which is an initiative actually supported by Brazil right now, could raise an estimated 200 and 250 billion per year. There are other options who are looked at, like the levy on the aviation and on maritime. So we're talking about a very limited levy, but that could actually draw really increase and really large and at scale financial resource at the level of the country. So that task force now includes what's initially led, as I was mentioning, by Barbados, Kenya, and France. Now includes 17 members and a really balanced representation from both global and north and south, if that concept makes any sense anymore. I think that, well, the feeling we have is the taboo on international tax cooperation is breaking. We see, like, with also the debt kind of crisis about everywhere, the capacity to actually count on some of debt from the government is really reducing, and we have to look at political and economic realities. And having some of the kind of more like polluting industry that have to take time to transition, of course, but will have to transition to pay for some of the transition costs, but also the kind of adaptation and loss and damage cost that is going to increase. It's absolutely essential to keep some sort of financial stability. Just to conclude, but just like a few words about maybe the political role of Europe. Europe must lead. Of course, I'm speaking from the European Climate Foundation, so I'd like to touch on that role of Europe. And Europe has made great progress in 10 years. The Green Deal is not perfect, but it's still the most ambitious climate program in the world. And there are a lot of people looking at what Europe is going to do in those moments. Reporting requirement needs to be proportionate, of course, and especially for smaller companies. But the current actually debates, unfortunately, under the omnibus, too often misrepresent actual scope and impact. And I think we have to avoid mixing simplification with total erase. And CSRD only applies directly to listed SMEs, while other small businesses here are affected only indirectly through value chain requirement. So a practical solution to streamline the framework for mid-cap is to adapt the EFRAG draft list SME standards or adapt the application of ESRS Set 1. This would cut reporting burden without dismantling the entire system, which actually is a good thing to give the market some predictability and stability that I think that we all think it needed now, especially at a time where there are actually intentional ways to disturb that and to make a bit of intoxication. So I think that we should try in Europe to stick to some of the really also basic things that are good for European competitiveness and economy. So of course, in terms of autonomy, Europe must strengthen its autonomy. But let's be clear, Europe will always be dependent on some other region for some raw materials, for example. So we have to push for a smart approach to manage our dependencies strategically and trying to build some opportunistic and balanced partnership with some region of the world. I think now the North and the South has just exploded, so the kind of traditional partnership or alliance is now being redefined. So we have to be smart and to think what is economy, but also think about a more balance in terms of value chain in some of the partnership with our partners. That means also deepening cooperation with international partner. And we all know that, the kind of dream about being autonomous and stick to some national would just like have Europe to really lose a lot of power and economic power within the international market. So many countries still believe in working together and share challenge, including climate change. Europe must spearhead efforts to build coalition of the willing and show that the spirit of the international cooperation which made the Paris Agreement possible is still alive. So they are a big challenge. I guess we cannot count on the same force, but the economics are strong. And majority of people, I hope, including you in this room, still care. So I guess we have to stand up firm for the world we want and the world we need. Thank you.
So thank you, Laurence, for this interesting and rich presentation. I'm Marc-Étienne Sébir. I'm Global Co-Head of Banking and Finance at the law firm CMS and also Vice-Chair of the ICMA Regional Committee for France. I would now like to invite Nicolas Pfaff and his panelists on stage. Nicolas is Deputy Chief Executive and Head of Sustainable Finance at ICMA. So why should policymakers or central banks care about climate change? What role could they play in directing capital flows towards green projects? Nicolas, I'll leave you introduce the experts you have invited to answer these questions. Thanks.
Marc-Étienne, thank you very much for the the introduction et bonjour à tous et ravi que vous ayez pu nous rejoindre aujourd'hui à cette conférence. Don't worry, I'll switch back to English. I'm delighted to moderate this panel and very grateful for Laurence Breton providing a very good segue for this discussion, because we're going to talk about the role of policymakers, but also very appropriately of central banks. I have a great panel representing many of the key players in this debate. Hélène Bussière, who's the head of asset management unit in the Director General of the Financial Markets at the European Commission, has very kindly come right over from Brussels, and she's going to tell us about things which have literally been coming hot off the press in the last few days. I'm also delighted to have a representative of our host. Yann Marin is the Deputy Director General for Financial Stability, but very appropriately, he is the head of the Secretariat of the Network for Greening the Financial System, which is a group of central banks, as was mentioned before. And then last but not least, Robert Youngman, who's the team leader of the Green Finance and Environment Directorate at the OECD. So really, I don't think we could have wished for a better representation. And I'm going to turn straight to Hélène, who again is very kindly joined us. And I'm going to ask you the obvious question. So we have seen the Commission and in fairness, the co-legislators, so member states, and the Parliament. I mention this because everybody thinks that it's all about the Commission. It's not. The Commission proposes, and often what the Commission proposes is quite reasonable, and then a lot of things happen. And then we end up with something which can be quite different. We've ended up in a world where clearly Europe has the most advanced and comprehensive sustainable legislative framework. We talk, in fact, about literally a regime. There's a number of pieces of legislation. But this has led also to a debate on simplification, because I think quite objectively we may have overdone it a bit. And we may have overdone it because of the way legislation is produced in Europe, and also because of the politicization, I think, of many of the issues in sustainability. And then I'd love you to tell us about the omnibus packages, and particularly what's come out of the press with respect to CSRD, CSDDD, EU taxonomy, CBAM, and InvestEU. And if that was enough acronyms for you, I'll stop here and hand over to Hélène.
Thank you, Nicolas. And okay, good. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here to present, indeed, as you exactly said, what we adopted as the Commission last week. So I think for everyone's information, I will maybe summarize a bit what it contains, and I will explain a bit what why it was so important for the Commission to make this proposal at this very moment, when the Commission is just starting its work. I think what happened last week is really an important milestone in the start of this new Commission. It's a milestone because it's the first time where the Commission delivers concretely on this objective of reconciling the objective of competitiveness with its Green Deal objective. I can see why it might be perceived maybe by some people as maybe going too far in a certain direction, other people saying it's not going far enough. And I think what we've put on the table, as Nicolas said, is probably the right balance, at least what we think is the right calibration for this omnibus, in an effort to simplify and streamline our regulatory framework. It's true that under the previous mandate, the Commission issued a very high number of new regulatory frameworks that mean a lot of new reporting requirements, new obligations for companies, and that all comes at a cost that we cannot ignore. And so now that this new Commission has put competitiveness at the core of its priorities, it was considered as absolutely necessary to reconcile, as I said before, this new objective with the objective of a Green Deal. And I want to insist on that. The Commission remains committed to the objective of the Green Deal. We have no choice but to organize our transition to an economy that can combat climate change, and that do so in a way that benefits all citizens and that benefits also all companies. It's an imperative. Now, coming to the objective of the proposal. I think one of the weakness of the rules as we adopted them in the last mandate is that there's not enough buy-in from the citizens and from companies. That was visible in the outcome of the European elections, and I think that's the reason why the Commission decided to put forward this agenda of simplification. We adopted the first omnibus last week. There will be more omnibuses in the coming month, touching other areas. I think this first package was highly visible because it touches sustainable finance and reporting obligations, which were considered areas where the Commission was really leading the way. So it was highly visible. But there are other aspects in this omnibus. There are also elements that will touch on InvestEU program, aiming to facilitate access to funding opportunities for innovative companies, and a number of other things that will come in the next month. Maybe touching on the content of the proposals. I will maybe spend a bit more time on CSRD and CSDDD and the taxonomy regulation, which touch more directly financial services, and which probably is of interest to you. As regards CSRD, I think I would like to highlight 4 main features of the proposal. The first one is a reduction in the scope of companies that will be subject to the mandatory reporting obligation. We have decided to increase to 1,000 employees the level at which companies will be forced will be subject to the obligation to report on their KPIs. So that's first really important and probably the most visible element of the package, a reduction in the scope of the CSRD. Another important aspect is the timing element. Because one of the big criticism of the rule is that they started to apply more or less all at the same time. And if you take them all combined, it means that the administrative burden for company is considered probably disproportionate, especially for SMEs. Hence the decision to postpone the application of the CSRD by 2 years for companies that are what we call Wave 2 and Wave 3 companies, meaning smaller companies and listed SMEs. And so we put forward what we call a stop-the-clock proposal, which is a proposal to simply delay entirely the application of the CSRD obligations for these Wave 2 and Wave 3 companies. That will, by the way, give us collectively, so not just the Commission, but collectively, that will give the co-legislators enough time to decide how to deal with the substance of the reporting, which is another important aspect of the proposal. Do we want the CSRD to remain as comprehensive as it is currently, or do we want to adjust the scope and, to be very concrete, reduce the number of data points that companies have to report? And in order to negotiate that, we need some time. That's why the proposal contains 2 elements, a stop-the-clock part that can be negotiated very quickly, and one part of the proposal which is more on substance. When we discuss substance, I would like to flag also that another extremely important part of the proposal is linked to, as Laurence mentioned in her presentation, to the obligation to reduce the burden for SMEs. And that's why the omnibus contains what we call a value chain cap, meaning a system whereby SMEs will be allowed to push back on some requests that might come from larger groups, larger companies that are, when they are part of the value chain, and therefore they might be subject to some reporting requirements that are not mandatory as per the law, at least because the requirements would not necessarily apply to them, but requirements that become applicable simply because they are part of the value chain. And we need to limit that obligation, and that's another element of the proposal. And finally, another aspect which is not part of the proposal itself, but which is part of the upcoming Level 2 rules, are changes to the ESRS, so the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, on which the Commission will work together with EFRAG, because the proposals will be made by EFRAG, but the intention is to downsize the number of data points. One word on the taxonomy very quickly, because there were a lot of discussions before the proposal was adopted on whether the taxonomy level 1 would be reopened or not. You might have seen that it's not the case. The taxonomy is only open at what we call level 2, meaning on the implementing rules. I should specify that at this stage the rules are actually not fully set in stone. They're not yet adopted. We are consulting on some alternative methodologies, and I'm insisting on that point because I'm actually asking you, all of you who are active in the sector, to reply to these consultations and to give your opinion on whether the recalibration on the taxonomy delegated act is accurate or not. And the Commission will only adopt these level 2 measures later in the spring, most likely by the end of 2025. So for the taxonomy regulation, we are not touching, once again, the level 1. We are making adjustment at the level 2. And those adjustments concern the reporting templates that will be significantly reduced. They also concern the GAR, so the green asset ratio, and the intention is to simplify the reporting on the GAR for banks and insurance. And lastly, I should say that the intention is also to revise the technical screening criteria in the coming months. We're already making an attempt in this first wave to revise some aspect of the do not significant harm principle, but there will be further revisions in the coming months. So that's just maybe to give you a very, very quick overview. I know, apologies if I was a bit long, but I think it's important for you to understand where we stand. In terms of impact, I think you have to realize that the proposal will reduce the reporting obligations for 40,000 companies. Meaning that companies in scope of the CSRD initially, there were approximately 50,000 companies in scope, and with the reduction in scope, we will stay with more or less 10,000 companies. So it's a very, very significant reduction of the scope of the proposal, which gives you an idea of the level of ambition of the Commission for this mandate. I will maybe stop here for now. And
then, thank you. Yeah, we could go on for the whole half hour, but I thought it was really good. Quick summary of where the Commission landed, and I think we're going to spend probably the next year or two discussing this. I'm going to turn to Jan. I remember going to the kickoff meeting of the NGFS in the Netherlands, I think more than a decade ago, and it's amazing what's happened, because it started, I think, with 3 or 4 central banks. There was the Dutch Central Bank, the Banque de France, and I think was the Bank of England at the time?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. And so now there's 130 banks, et cetera, and you've been doing some extraordinary work particularly on scenarios. But I wanted to ask you to summarize for us, what has been done in the scope.
And evolution.
Yeah, and evolution.
Yes, thank you, Nicholas. Maybe just a word about the NGFS, because not everyone I know is familiar with the network. The Network for Greening the Financial System has been created in 2017 after the One Summit Planet in Paris. And it has gathered a few central banks, 8 in total, actually, at the beginning, who were committing to work together on the topics related to sustainable finance in the field of central banks and supervisors. The 8th were 5 Europeans, indeed. We had the United Kingdom, Sweden, Germany, the Netherlands, and France. And we had also 3 non-Europeans, which were Mexico, Singapore, and China. We were very quickly joined by the European Central Bank and by the Central Bank of Morocco and by the Bank of International Settlements, and those 11 are the founding members of the NGFS. We are now 160 something when we are where we are standing. It's a huge community now. We have been gathering resources to work on those topics. We have produced a lot of reports that are publicly available. All our work is publicly available. The most important part is that we are working on the mandate of central bank and supervisors. That's where we are talking from. And often we are told that we should do more, but this is also our limitations. And we need to remain in the boundaries of our mandates. And it's also important to understand that it's a coalition of the willing. The NGFS has been created because international organizations at the time in 2017 were not able to work on sustainable finance. The Financial Stability Board, the Basel Committee, and other international organizations were not in capacity to move forward. And this new idea, this new international organization is based on that concept. Coalition of the willing, the one that wants to do something can join forces and move forward, whether the others are or not. One very important indeed element in our work has been the creation of the scenarios. We have published in November 2024 the 5th batch of those scenarios, showing a significant evolution in the impact of those scenarios. So we have 5, 7, depending how you are categorizing them, scenarios. The worst case scenario being the continuation of current policies, and the best scenario would be reaching the Paris Agreement goals. The negative impact on GDP is significant in all cases. We are losing 7.3 points of GDP in the best case scenario by 2050, and we are losing 14.8 GDP points by 2050 in the worst case scenario. So that's the range. This analysis is showing losses that are doubled from the 4th batch of the scenarios, and the reason for that is that we have actually expanded our knowledge about the consequences of extreme weather events in particular. The modeling that we do is incorporating new extreme weather events and also incorporating the persistence of some effects which we had not in the past in the damage function of our models, and that's the reason why we are reaching those levels. So it's very significant. We were discussing the macroeconomic consequences of climate change. They are real and they are massive. It doesn't mean that we are forecasting a recession, not at all. It has to be understood that this is a loss. So it's a reduction in the pace of growth, but we could still grow during that time, depending on other macroeconomic elements. It's not just climate change, but it's really important to understand that in any case, we will be growing slower than we would have without the climate change. I'm often asked also if we are now confident that we have a full number. I'm afraid not. We are still underestimating, most likely, the impact of climate change on our economy, in particular because we have not been able to integrate some very significant element into our models yet. We are working on them. Those elements are related to the hysteresis elements of climate change, meaning what we are calling tipping points. So the points where if you are crossing that line, you are not coming back from there. And those will have, of course, significant impact also on our macroeconomics if we are going too far into the increase in temperatures. There are also accelerating elements that we may not perceive correctly, and something that is more exploratory, I would say. It's the nexus between nature and climate. The degradation of nature is actually deteriorating our ability to fight against the increase in temperatures, because nature plays a big role in limiting carbon emissions. So those are elements that may actually increase the impact that we are seeing on the macroeconomy. So it's a big element. I would like to say that those scenarios, of course, are debatable. We could consider that actually we could end up with a worse scenario than just maintaining current policies. But even if we don't reach the Paris Agreement, every reduction in carbon emissions that we do have a positive impact on the macroeconomy, and this is worth fighting for. Transition costs are limited compared to the reduction of physical risks that we are mitigating with the transition policies, and this is why you see such a big difference in impact between the best case scenario and the worst case scenario.
Well, if that wasn't sobering, right? Okay, so you can rebound from that, Robert. So the OECD has been doing some fantastic work also on sustainable and transition finance, and we've had a really good collaboration actually on transition finance, and I was going to say great minds think alike. We shouldn't overflatter ourselves, but you know, in the reflection that we had on sustainable finance, transition finance, we this dialogue with the OECD, and we found that we're thinking very much in the same direction and provided complementary advice. And my segue here is you've just published a really interesting document aligning finance with climate goals, and it'd be great if you could, you know, also give us a quick summary of that.
Great. Well, thanks, Nicholas, and great to be here. It's an honor. So I'll talk a bit about the results of a report that just came out last year that my colleagues, Raphael Jaschnik and Yolene Noels, who may be here in the audience, so hopefully I'll represent this well. Overall, the report points, unsurprisingly, at a low degree of alignment of financial flows with climate mitigation goals. One sort of high-level finding is that in 2022, new clean energy investments were $1.7 trillion US, 1.5 trillion for fossil fuels, and this is only a very small share of total investments. Now looking at, and this is cheating going across different sessions here, but looking at the debt markets and corporate debt securities, in 2022, green labeled bond issuance and flows reached 0.4 trillion corporate issuances versus from carbon intensive issuances 1.4 trillion, so there's a very big difference there. Also, that 1.4 trillion of corporate bond issuances accounted for fully a third of corporate bond issuances. So that's a signal that investments are being made, and it's a large portion of issuances from corporates. So that's sort of a red flag. In terms of corporate bond stocks, green labeled bonds in 2023, the total stock of corporate green bond issuances was 1.6 trillion as of 2023. For carbon intensive, it was 1.7 trillion, so roughly even there. Issuances of labeled green bonds has declined, unfortunately, year on year by corporates in 2022 and 2023. So yes, this is not uplifting news. Unfortunately, for financial institutions, a little bit better. Issuances for labeled green bonds was roughly steady in 2022 and 2023. Just another couple numbers for you, and then I'll talk a little bit about interpreting this. Looking at banks, the report notes that among 1,100 large banks in 2022, they provided financing flows for nearly 1 trillion to fossil fuel supply, while 0.7 went to low carbon energy supply. Finally, sovereign bonds, where we know relatively little. Green labeled bonds accounted for 0.25 trillion. We don't know about fossil intensive issuances. I think we can assume that they're pretty high. So what do these numbers mean? Effectively what we're doing, and this is not the first time this has been used, but we've got a bathtub, and with one side we're turning on the tap of investments into clean energy and the transition, and unfortunately with the other hand we're pulling the plug, and that's financing for fossil fuels, and as a result we end up not making nearly as much progress on climate change as we would like. This means that we're not aligning with the Paris Agreement as we committed to doing under Article 2.1c, a very difficult goal, which unfortunately we still remains a fairly distant goal, and where changes in policy, I think arguably, are really needed. For levers for climate mitigation, a key question, this goes into my next question, is what are the impacts, the direct impacts on investment decisions and incentives for investment decisions? And so this is relevant to what the EC is doing, what governments are doing around the world, and I think the current situation lends itself to a re-examination of the effectiveness of policies. And maybe just a quick preview to my next comments. There's a recent OECD report called Beyond ESG Ratings, and it finds that 68% of all ESG metrics measure company policies and activities rather than outcomes. So there's a question of whether the focus is in the right place and what can be done about this. So I'll talk a little bit more about that for the next question. Thanks.
Robert, thank you very much, and really interesting numbers. I mean, we see sustainable bond issuance going up again last year, but when you get more granular, you can get indeed a less reassuring message. So, Ellen, I want to come back to you, and just as a warning, we've got 15 more minutes. I think it's 5 minutes each, so that we don't give Valerie a heart attack, and we stay roughly within the timeline. So then, we didn't talk about SFDR, and SFDR is the buy-side disclosure regulation, and arguably from a market perspective, the two most important pieces of regulation are probably taxonomy and SFDR. But SFDR is out of scope, and at least for the time being, so we'd like to understand that. And also there is a concern because, again, bringing us directly to the markets, ICMA, in a way, sort of anticipated a bit the SFDR review by bringing in guidelines last year on fund naming for sustainability funds, and there was some turmoil around the treatment of green bonds. I think we landed in a reasonable place, but there is some concern that we've had Article 8, Article 9, reorganization, sustainable fund market. We've had ESMA, coming in and proposing, among other, a transition fund category, which also led to some controversy. Are we going to rejig everything again with SFDR in 2 years? So basically, every 3 years we take it, we shake it, and we start again. So that was a long question, but very interested in your remarks on that.
So as you rightly note, SFDR is not part of the omnibus package. I think that was a deliberate choice to say that we first need to see where we land on disclosures in order to build a regime for financial intermediaries, which SFDR is in fact built for. So the SFDR review will happen. I can't indicate a very precise timeline. I think at the moment it's planned for Q4 2025. But we are a bit in a difficult place to build a meaningful review. The reason being that, the landscape has changed quite significantly over the last month, and we'll have to reflect those changes in the design of the review. So just to highlight a few of these challenges. So first of all, as you said, Nicolas, it's true that with the ESMA fund naming rules, which have had a real effect on the market, right? We're still monitoring the effects because there's a transition phase, and the transition phase will only expire around mid-May. So, the market is still evolving, but from what we hear and from what we see, a number of investment funds have had to either adjust their investment strategy or simply rename, which is, in fact, a pretty important effect. So we will have to incorporate this element in the review. We can't ignore the fact that the market has structured in a certain way. And as you said, we need to ensure regulatory stability. We need to take stock of how the market is now structured when we design, in particular, the product categories. So I think we are quite aware of the fact that we cannot go for a fully fledged review or a revolution. We will have to go for an evolution of the SFDR that has to strike a balance between, preventing greenwashing, that remains an objective, of course, ensuring that there's a clear delineation between the categories, because you wouldn't want a broad ESG category to be mixed with a sustainability category, so we need to come up with relatively clear criteria. And at the same time, we simply need to accept the fact that the market is now structured in a certain way, that products are offered to investors, and so that will also drive, of course, our analysis. Another important element that we have to factor in the preparation of the review is the omnibus, because the fact that there will be a reduction in the number of data points, so of raw data coming from corporates, will have an impact on financial intermediaries. So how do we deal with that? Do we accept that that financial intermediaries will rely more on estimates and proxies? Maybe that's perfectly acceptable, but that has a cost. Also, I think we need to be clear that we accept the cost, but we probably also need to ensure that at least if there's estimates, the underlying methodologies should be sufficiently stable and clear to ensure that what is disclosed to the public is correct. So I think the omnibus comes with a number of additional constraints for the SFDR review. So I can't tell you exactly where we will land. I can simply confirm that we are quite aware of those challenges and will factor in those elements when preparing the proposal.
Yeah, I can only say fair enough. I mean, it's an extremely complex situation. For what it's worth, we're going to be publishing on the topic in a few weeks, and we'll continue to try to make very constructive contributions to all this. And our members are, I can see Stéphane sort of nodding his head, who represents the buy side at ICMA, and chairing one of our key committees. Okay, I'm going to move back to our host. I'm going to ask you the obvious, Jan, and again with an eye to time. I mean, what's the next priorities for the NGFS? Are you going to keep on churning out scenarios, or is there other things on the horizon?
There are other things. We have 5 priorities for the coming 2 years. The first one will be the publication of short-term scenarios, actually. This is expected in spring this year. The objective is a little different from the macroeconomic one that I just mentioned. There will be more tailored for every given country, and there will be a more operationable, let's say, for companies that want to use them for risk management perspective or stress testing perspectives. So this is our new flagship product that is coming soon. The second topic that is one key priority is related to a request by the G20 presidency. We are looking into integrating adaptation into transition plans. We have been working a lot on mitigation of risks, but we should also adapt to the changes that are to come. And this is a new direction of the work for the NGFS, and a very important one. The third will be to continue our work on monetary policy. We have already published in 2024 a number of conceptual papers explaining what is changing in monetary policy prospects given the climate change. We are more working now on implementation, what it means for the strategy of central banks, given the unclear consequences of climate change when it comes to inflation. It's also about what kind of monetary policy operation can we do to mitigate those effects, and of course looking into the modeling and how this is affecting the way that we should anticipate inflation in the future. Our fourth priority is a little different. It's a capacity building. We have been joined by a number of emerging market economies. They are not at the same level of understanding of their own risks, and they need support to actually embrace all the tools that we have created. So it's more on the implementation side, let's say. What are the first steps that the central banks need to take to go into dealing with climate change in the future? And the last one is nature. We need to do the same work that we have done with climate. We need to understand the macroeconomic consequences of the degradation of nature, and see if there is a need to take this on board also for central banks and supervisors.
Yeah, that reminds me. My son asked me what subject should he study, and he wants to be an engineer. And I said, well, you should look at climate adaptation. That looks like an area of where people are going to be employed, and there'll be lots of opportunities. Coming to you, Robert, you mentioned the problem of alignment with climate goals. Can you, to finish up, can you tell us what you think is the state of play on incentive and disincentives for corporates to align with the Paris Agreement? And again, you've published on this.
Thanks very much. So last year we published a major report called Climate Action Monitor that takes a look globally at where things stand. I think Laurence before talked about where current policies lead us. That's 3.1 degrees by 2100. I think that the latest estimates on current NDCs, there's a little gap between those and current policies, a little bit more ambitious. That would lead us to 2.6 to 2.8 degrees. There's a new round now that is being called for, and we have to see whether there's more ambition. There's significant headwinds, as you know. In addition, the report takes a look at sort of policies, stringency, and frequency. And as part of stringency, there's a question about how many countries have laws on setting targets and laws that can be used as a basis for enforcement. So out of 110 countries that have net zero commitments, 27 countries and the EU, representing only 16% of global GHG emissions, have enshrined their net zero commitments into law. So clearly, at a time of arguably backsliding, when you don't have your targets in law, there's a significant additional risk that you won't meet the targets. The report also takes a look at this question of frequency. And so based on an assessment of climate policies and their frequency, and looking at countries that account for 2/3 of global emissions, the report finds that national climate mitigation action, so the passing of new regulations, let's say, increased by 1% in 2022 and 2% in 2023. Unfortunately, that compares to an average of 10% increase per year between 2010 and 2021. So at a time when you would need to be increasing your action, you're actually slowing it down. Now, there's a little lag in this report, but it's definitely concerning. Onto the question of climate policy effectiveness. There's ongoing work at the OECD on this critical topic, but in the meantime, I can tell you there's a report cited in our monitor which had 3 interesting conclusions. One, most identified emission reductions are linked to 2 or more measures, and so that highlights the importance of policy mixes. Second, and you've heard this before, there's no one-size-fits-all approach, and you can find success in different jurisdictions with different policy mixes. Third, probably important to highlight every year, carbon pricing is particularly effective in the electricity and industry sector. So I mentioned before that there's a question about incentives and disincentives and whether policies are enough. Nicholas also mentioned that we've had some cooperation on the topic of transition finance. So 2 years ago, we published the OECD guidance on transition finance. There's a good amount of guidance in this area. We focused our work largely on environmental credibility. Moving forward, and I think it's very timely now, given what Hélène said and sort of the shift in discussions toward competitiveness at the same time that we decarbonize, we want to explore this relationship between credible corporate transition plans and the credibility of national plans and sectoral plans, because clearly the companies need that to be able to move forward, stay competitive while they're decarbonizing. And also, just to go back to this question of incentives, I think even if there's no direct proof right now I can talk to, it'll be probably in the next report, intuitively, policies need to clearly shift incentives and behavior in order to get a different result on emissions, and I think that needs to be the focus. Thanks.
Robert, thank you very much. With that, we're going to stop. Many thanks to my wonderful panelists, and we're going to move on to the next speech. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Nick, and the panelists there. Real tour de force, I think, from a policy and central bank perspective in terms of what's going on in the sustainable agenda. So next, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our second speaker and our second keynote address. I'll invite Bernard de Longeviaille to the stage. Bernard is the Global Head of Sustainable Finance for S&P Global Ratings, a very good friend of ICMA as well. He's in charge of leading the execution of S&P's Global Ratings Sustainable Finance strategy with regard to sustainable finance products, including second-party opinions and climate transition assessment. And he's also heading an S&P Global Ratings Climate and SDG Financing Gap in Lower Income Countries Working Group. And Bernard will present his analysis about geopolitical risks and climate change. So looking forward to hearing from Bernard. And I would also like to, again, echo Ellie's earlier statement and thank S&P for very generously sponsoring the networking cocktail after we close this conference. So Bernard, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Brian. And hopefully, yes, you will enjoy the cocktail and my speech as well. So thanks, ICMA, for inviting me to share our perspective on geopolitical risks and climate transition. My two main messages, I think nobody would be surprised, are that current geopolitical trends are creating clear headwinds to the climate transition process, but that at the same time, climate transition is a mega trend, a long-term play that will shape the next decades, whatever short-term fluctuations we will see. And despite some real improvements in the past decade, with global climate on a below or around 3 degree trajectory according to IPCC versus around 3.5 at the time of the Paris Agreement, we all agree we are much behind the Paris ambition with a 1.5 degree carbon budget already almost emitted into the atmosphere. Oh, this is working, yes. You can see on these slides, the top three are three climate scenarios that we consider realistic. The two below are not realistic in our opinion anymore, and that we are routinely using as part of our credit rating agencies' activities. A green rule, which speaks to a below 2 degree scenario, an inflection scenario, which speaks to a 2.4 degree trajectory by the end of the century, and a Discord scenario, which is a 3.1 degree. And what we are witnessing today in terms of geopolitical trends and developments, at least in the short term, speak to some feature of our Discord type of scenario. Now, and that speaks to, if you look at these, this is the decomposition of the scenarios from an energy production standpoint. Even in the Discord scenario, what we can see is that the green energy, the renewable, are growing steadily, i.e. there is something fundamental at play, whatever happens. Now, I would like to remind that these are not predictions, but are scenarios. The main headwinds we see to a climate transition process are ESG backlash, diverging political priorities, the fragmentation of the Washington consensus, and the lack of support to help lower-income countries adapting and transitioning. With regard to the ESG backlash, the change in the US administration is amplifying the consequence of a pre-existing ESG backlash. In the context of extreme political polarization in the US, climate transition policies have been associated for several years with perceived broader ESG political agendas, preventing the building of a consensus about the need to transition. Corporations have been confronted to litigation risks and responded sometimes with greenwashing, hiding their commitments, and public pronouncement, including through, for example, the dismantling of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance last year. Now, the new administration comes with an agenda to roll back the policies of its predecessor. And beside leaving the Paris Agreement, we are seeing multiple initiatives. New offshore wind developments are being stopped. EV subsidies are also at risk, as well as potential other areas of the green energy value chains. Now, thinking about the capital markets, the implementation of the SEC climate disclosure rules are also being challenged by the new administration. And the fear of litigation or to antagonize the new administration has pushed a number of banks and asset managers to quit the Net Zero Banking Alliance. And we believe that beside the reduction of subsidies, this curtailment of public commitment and of transparency will create additional risk of slower transition momentum, in particular in the US, due to the reduction of peer pressure and transparency, which are integral to market discipline. Now, the second type of headwinds that we see also a lot in Europe now is that the climate transition priority is coming under pressure against the backdrop of tighter fiscal constraints and multiple and sometimes conflicting priorities. Policymakers across the world are increasingly focused on energy security, economic competitiveness, we heard that, and defense spending, which is a big thing with the announcements of today. Distributional questions are also being raised in connection with the energy transition amid concern about voter backlash and cost of living crisis. And this multiplication of priorities in a period of fiscal constraint, I'm insisting, have and will have impact on the amount of public funds available to fund the transition. We really see the energy trilemma at play between energy security, affordability, and sustainability. Just providing example, the UK backtracking on heat pump targets for affordability reasons, as well as the EU recent decision today to ease the emission rules for combustion engines, are examples of this challenge to reconcile social and industrial policies with a decarbonization agenda. And so far, by the way, one of the reasons why the impact of climate transition risks on our credit rating has been limited is that beside the capacity of corporations to adapt, policymakers have balanced their climate transition ambitions against the social and economic cost of transition policies. And the omnibus regulation is another illustration of this trilemma at play. And if we look ahead, other potential areas of future attention is with a gradual phase-out of the free EU ETS allowance and phasing of the CBAM carbon certificates from January 1st to 26, we could see, depending on industry's capacity to decarbonize at pace, at the required speed, while the rest of the world doesn't have to apply similar policy, we could see tension coming again. And this lack of global coordinated policies is this third geopolitical headwind to the transition. One condition we believe that would make the first scenario possible would be is global coordination of policies to align incentives as well as free trade and free movements of capital and goods to maximize scale effects and diffusion of the best green technologies. We are clearly not heading today in that direction, at least in the short term, I will insist. The Washington consensus is fragmenting. We are moving away from the Bretton Woods system where free trade and multilateralism were the dominant values in favor of bilateralism and a more confrontational logic of power and priority given to domestic agendas. The multiplication, just for example, of trade barriers on green technology imports, or conversely, China putting restrictions to export of critical technologies used to produce advanced batteries, will slow down at the diffusion and adoption of transition technologies. Last but not the least, we see a risk of persistent failure to address the climate financing gap in lower-income countries. We view this persistent and growing climate adaptation and transition financing gap in lower-income countries as a major issue which heighten long-term social and environmental risks to local and global financial stability. From our estimate, and these are 250 scenarios, we believe that in average, low-income countries, GDP are 4.4 times more exposed to future climate physical risk, than upper-income countries. And the gap, has been growing years after years. And despite the enhanced climate finance targets agreed at COP29, we believe that the combination of competing industrial policies to attract investment in developed economies, with growing constraint on public finance, and the risk that we see at the moment of relative deprioritization of development policies from at least a number of countries, will put pressure on the amount of funds available for climate finance in developing economies and will make the delivery on this goal more difficult. Now, despite all this sobering picture that I'm providing, we still believe that climate transition is a mega trend that will not go away, even if we don't expect it to be linear, and nobody should have expected such trend to be linear. The first element of this, the first factor is that climate physical risk, and this has been mentioned before, is already materializing. The cost of climate physical risk has been increasing decade after decade for the past 40 years. If you spoke to insurers, every decade has been worse than the previous one. And the last 10 years, and you can see here, has shown an acceleration of climate-related losses. And whatever the political backlash we can see in certain countries, a majority of people across geographies, including in the US, if you look at the surveys, believe that climate change is a major risk and that humans have an influence on it. Climate physical risk, also, if you look at on the other side, other stakeholders, is singled out among the top 3 risks identified by global leaders at the World Economic Forum. So we believe that the succession of catastrophic events, such as the LA fires, the Valencia flooding, are shaping public awareness across the world of public policy quite regular failure to adapt and mitigate climate change. And policymakers across the world have, and they will increasingly have to explain how they address these 2 challenges of climate adaptation and mitigation. The second type of factor which is supporting the transition is that there are strong geopolitical and industrial reasons to invest in the green economy. And this has been mentioned. Not investing enough is taking the risk of missing an industrial revolution, exposing your economy to strand assets risks, and creating future geopolitical dependencies. Green technologies have gained scale, achieved price competitiveness. We had example about solar, which growth and decline in price has been quite impressive. And these technologies are disrupting the old economy. China has made a big competitive advantage of its investment in green. It's built global dominant position across the green energy value chain. Investments in renewable energy are also a way to address its energy dependency on oil supply at a time when the reliance on maritime routes is seen as a strategic vulnerability for China. If you look at Europe, the development of green energy is contributing to reduce our reliance on Russia or Russian gas. And again, we have the omnibus, but we do not expect really a fundamental shift in long-term strategy to develop a greener economic system, also seen as a potential strategic advantage in the global economic competition. Now moving to the US, it has no strategic interest to reverse the current development of its green industries. The US have managed to develop a green energy ecosystem which is progressively limiting its dependency on China technologies. From an industrial standpoint and policy and geopolitical perspective, cutting investment could undermine US capacity to develop its strategic autonomy. Beside the fact that many projects and subsidies are already committed or out of the control of the federal administration, the fact that red states are the first beneficiaries of IRA subsidies is another element to keep in mind. So whereas we believe that the curtailment of some IRA subsidies will slow down the momentum, the underlying economics and all the reasons I mentioned will continue to support some transition momentum in the US, whatever the administration does. The third structural trend, and this is the ICMA trend, I would say, which plays in favor of the transition momentum, is the gradual establishment of a more robust sustainable market ecosystem with enhanced transparency, information clarity, and reliability, and ongoing improvement in overall market discipline. Years after years, despite the setbacks like potentially the SEC climate finance disclosure, we are witnessing the gradual building of a more robust sustainable market ecosystem with better awareness of environmental impacts of economic activities across value chain. I believe CSRD has been very helpful for many corporations to understand their footprint. Better disclosure, whatever scope of CSRD, it will be an improvement. ISSB implementation, more comprehensive, and ongoing improvement in ICMA voluntary principles. We have now 20 taxonomies in place around the world, which lack sometimes consistency, but overall contribute to enhance the clarity about green and to a less extent on transition investments. We also view the adoption of Article 6 at COP29 as an important milestone towards the development of more robust voluntary carbon market, which have been really in bad shape for the past few years. We are at S&P observing, as an SPO provider, a gradual improvement trend in GSSB market discipline over the past years. Some behaviors, some types of structure which were possible 4 years ago, would not survive today the market criticism. So really the market is learning and getting better. So overall, between the reality of climate physical risk, the broad awareness of climate change risk across the world populations, the geopolitical and economic fundamental reason to invest in the green economy, as well as this gradual build-up of a more robust market discipline, we see climate transition as a mega trend which will not go away. For us, as a credit rating agency and a provider of sustainable finance, investing in further enhancing our capacity to understand transition risk and opportunities remains today, whatever happens on the other side of the Atlantic, a key strategic priority and a necessity for us to stay relevant. Thanks very much for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bernard, for this very inspiring speech. I think it was very interesting and very comprehensive as well. So hopefully we can be optimistic for the future. It's about time now to speak about practitioner of the market. And I have the pleasure to introduce Tanguy Claquin, who is by chance my colleague, but is also the Global Head of Sustainability and member of the Management Committee of Crédit Agricole CIB. So Tanguy and the panelists, I invite you to be on the floor, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc. So I invite my panelists to join me on the floor. Bonjour. So we didn't meet before, so that's the moment. Well, thank you very much thank you, ICMA, for organizing this nice event. I think the question is debt capital market delivering on its commitment? I can say that ICMA certainly delivered on this commitment. Thank you for that, as well as Banque de France. So congratulations for that, and the Banque de France too. So we have some market practitioners, in fact, to discuss this aspect from an issuer, an investor, and a provider standpoint. We have no bank on stage because clearly the bank, they never deliver on their commitment. That's clear for everyone. So maybe, I mean, where do we stand 10 years after the COP in Paris on this capital market activity, in debt capital market more specifically? I think in 2014, if my memory is right, there was 20 billion of green social sustainability bond issued per year. Last year it was 900 million, so I think it's time 36. So in terms of volume, it's not too bad. In terms of investors, because we speak a lot about issuer, but investor, it's quite interesting. I think probably in 2015, I was able to count the number of green bond funds on one end. Now, clearly, almost all asset managers have an instrument dedicated to investment in green social sustainability funds. So this has evolved also quite a lot. I think back in 2015, there were a few banks taking care of that. Now I think all investment banks, they have a team dedicated to chasing clients on this aspect. Even if they have exited the NZBA, they keep on chasing clients, which is a sign of something probably. In terms of taxonomy, it was mentioned before, there was nothing 20 years ago telling us what is green, maybe apart from the CBI, which was trying to develop something. Now we have 20 taxonomies on the ground. So in fact, a number of things have developed. But it's true that it's not only interesting to look at the position, but also the acceleration. 20 years ago, we had a number of, I would say, strong winds helping us, even if it was a small market. Now we have a larger market, but a number of strong headwinds. That's very strange. 10 years ago, I had to spend a lot of time convincing people in the investment bank that climate change was important. Now I think everybody's convinced, but I have to convince them that it's important for investment bank to stay active in that space, not at CACI, but generally speaking, probably. So we have 4 speakers to discuss this aspect and tell us more about their view. I'm very happy to have an investor, a provider of the market, and 2 issuers, but not only. I think they will provide also us with more insight about that. I will start with Jean-Baptiste as an investor, because I think you're always the last one to be asked, investor, what is your standpoint? I think it's good to start with investor for once. AXA in 2015 was already a member of the ExCom of the Green Bond Principle, already what we called at the time SRI investors, socially responsible investment, but that has gone, you know, some terms are going away. Can you tell us more about where you stand on that front, what the Net Zero Alliance is doing, and so on? Thank you.
Hello everyone, thanks for giving me the opportunity to present indeed what NZEOA is doing as well as AXA. I'm both part of a steering group of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance and CIO of AXA. There's about 88 institutions are part of this association. It's gathering 10 trillion of assets, so it's AUM. Is it working? Better? Great. Thanks. So, 88 institutions, 10 trillion of assets, and I think it has set over the years an excellent standard in what asset owners should look at when investing. It does not create any kind of joint cooperation or whatever. It's really about the method, about the methodology, how do you do it, and what to focus on. And I think it's doing really a great job, and we can see the carbon intensity overall of those market participants, all those investors, going down very significantly since 2019. I think it's accelerating, and it's not about adding new participants are adding to the momentum. So for me, the movement is ongoing. So far, NZEOA has managed to remain, off the hook compared to other associations, and of comments or legal threats from certain regulators. So it remains very active, very lively, and I hope it will remain this way. So first, global market, I think it's going, in the right direction, in the going down in intensity of our portfolios. For AXA, it's very natural for us to be part of this investment thesis for two reasons. Naturally, one, we are an insurer, so we are witnessing everything that has been described on the climate change consequences immediately, every year, for a very long time. So it's nothing, unfortunately, nothing surprising. And what was expressed on the outlook for the future and intensity of natural catastrophes, that's also what we also anticipate. Larger catastrophes, more frequent, and natural perils growing with severe impact on economy at local level, but also national and international level. So that's one. And second, it's on our investment base. Naturally, we are very long-term investors because our liabilities are very long. So we are very long-term investors, and we look to capture or to invest into companies, businesses that are developing also long-term strategies, resilient strategies, and it encompasses the climate transition theme, because there's whatever you believe, there's an economic transition behind it. And so you need to have companies that are resilient to this change, that will be able to adapt. So I think it's also, not just about measuring how much green, how much not green do you have, what is pure green, what is less. You need to invest in the global economy and make sure that you select the companies that will be, able to withstand all you describe, and the three scenarios with a number of ranges which are extremely wide. So being able to do that, I think, is our number one objective, very tangible, that we're doing and tracking every year, and allowing to reduce progressively the carbon intensity of our portfolios. I think compared to 2019, it's down 47% this year, so over the last 5 years. So it's progressing very quickly. We are happy about it, but and it's aligned with IPCC projections, so we are happy with that, but we think we need to continue. And the second one is because there's and I stop after that, I've been very long, but we, on top of addressing the general economy and addressing the companies, we also think that we need to also create behind this economic change, there's an economic value creation, there's economic wealth. So we want to invest into that theme. I think it's also for us attractive. Again, it's risky, like any investment activity, but it's attractive. We can feel the tailwind right now when the macroeconomic and geopolitical scene is changing very quickly, but we think it will remain because it's a mega trend. We try to put on the market additional 5 billion every year, financing, equity or debt, mostly debt, we're mostly debt investor, but 5 billion, at least 5 billion a year, again, that transition financing. So for me, to your initial question, globally and also for us as an investor, it's progressing, and I think it's very consistent with your introduction. It's progressing, and efforts are very steady, very massive. I think we can probably do more expanding. There's more we can do, but we'll come back to that later, I'm sure.
Thank you, Jean-Baptiste. I forgot to say you're Chief Investment Officer for AXA. It's written on the wall, so I think everybody could read it. I will turn to Pauline. So Pauline, you're Deputy CFO for the Agence Française de Développement. The Agence Française de Développement has a role in debt capital market as an issuer, but also has a role on the ground, assisting EM issuer or borrower to access funding. So do you think we're up to the challenge in the last 10 years?
Okay. Thank you, Tanguy. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. Maybe I will just start with a few words about our activity. I'm very happy to talk about development in those times, because development is a bit challenged today. So you said there is no bank. We consider at least ourselves as a bank, because our activity consists in providing loans to developing countries, and we are doing that mainly thanks to market resources. So we issue like 8 or 10 billion each year on the capital market, and half of it under the sustainable format. So we have a dual mandate. The first one, it's to fight against poverty, but the second one is to fight against climate change and to help countries to adapt to climate change. And this second mandate has become increasingly important. And today, this is the one that really drives the activity of the French Development Agency. So what do we do in practice to deliver on Paris Agreement commitment? Well, maybe just one number. Today, we generate 85% of France's total climate finance in developing countries. So we are a major actor. And so first one, we provide loans to finance mitigation and adaptation project on the ground, just like you said. But we also do other very important things. The first one maybe is that we support countries in setting up their NDCs or revising their NDCs and implementing their own strategies. We mentioned before how important are the country's commitment and the fact of defining clear NDCs and clear strategy to help the market. So we try to do that through loans or through technical assistance. We also try to work with them by providing public policy loans, and we think that a lot has to be done at the sovereign level to reduce actually some regulatory barriers that will help investment in the energy sectors, for instance. So we are doing that, for instance, in Uzbekistan, in the energy sector. We're helping them in modernizing the energy sector to help investors to invest in. And we also firmly believe that there is a lot to be done with financial institutions and especially with development banks national development banks and local development banks to increase and to attract more capital flows toward developing countries, toward bankable projects in developing countries. On that point, we concretely help them in defining their transition framework, local banks or national development banks. And they have a key role to play in mobilizing more capital for the transition in developing countries. One more figure, maybe. There are more than 500 public development banks, and they manage, actually they represent 2.5 trillion in annual investment. This is more or less 10% of total public and private investment flows. They do have, some of them, they do have a mandate about financing transition. If we manage to mainstream climate into their operation, it's already a very strong lever to increase the amount, and this is very, very necessary, of capital flows toward emerging countries.
Thank you so much, Pauline. I think I have to rebound on that, but I think we need to explore the full panel of solution that has been already developed in the market, and I will turn to Benedict. So Benedict, you are Chief Sustainability Group Director at SOR. You can tell us more what you are doing with SOR, but more specifically, you have also the chance to develop various sustainable finance solutions, green or blue and sustainability linked.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be here and very honored. So SOR, who is SOR? I'm sure you know SOR more for the municipal part of our activity, because we work with municipalities, we produce drinkable water and we treat wastewater water, but we have also an industrial activity, which is more recent because we have acquired an entity called Nijrus SOR Industrie. The HQ is based in Netherlands, who develops solutions for industrial clients. For example, for microprocessor sector, we work for ICMA Electronics to develop reuse solution, to produce also water with a very specific quality, because this kind of sector have a specific needs regarding quality. But we also, we have talked a lot, and I'm very happy about that, about adaptation to climate change, because we also develop modular solution to be able to, in fact, respond to the need because of storm, because of water stress, to be able to develop solution, and we plug the solution to be able to afford the need of the client when there is a crisis. We have 12,000 people all around the world, with a very important footprint at the European level, in France, Spain, Portugal, of course Netherlands. We are also present in the United States with an entity called Aquachem, a big company that produce reuse solution for big offices, and also we develop the market in Middle East, and the Asia part also. And the turnover is about 2 billion euros. So it's, in fact, it's a kind of a new company, because as we grow a lot, in fact, since 2021, the main challenges we face is to the integration and to be able to make circulate all the solutions we have acquired, thanks to the industrial part of this company, and to make this circulate for the municipal sector. And it's true that SOR, the particularity of SOR, is to use different sustainable finance tool. And as the head of sustainability, I can see the power of this tool. The first tool we have used is a sustainable linked bond emitted in 2021. And we have produces 3 main KPIs. One on carbon intensity. It's I won't say not an original one, but a one that is very powerful in the company is a one based on water. The KPI is the water withdrawal per subscriber, so we have a decreased trajectory. It's totally contrary to our business model. Because in fact today the business model of a company like SOR is to sell volume of water, and our activity is to sell water. But we know, and we are really conscious about the fact that in fact the today and tomorrow challenges is to limit our water withdrawal, our water consumption. So in fact it has really driven our strategy to try to find new solutions. It's not easy because we don't have really find yet the right model, but it's very powerful, even regarding municipalities, to share with them that in fact we have linked ourselves and we will have financial penalties if we do not succeed in achieving this KPI. I have tested it with Mayor. It's very, very powerful, and even inside the company, in fact, I can feel even today a gap between the top management and the fact that we say sustainability at the core of the strategy and so on, and our employee who says it's just greenwashing. But in fact, with this kind of KPI, they can really feel that in fact it's not just about greenwashing. We have linked ourselves with this kind of KPI, and we will pay penalties if we do not achieve it. So they really feel empowered by this kind of KPI. And again, for I think the head of sustainability of SOR, I was not the one who worked on this sustainable link bond, but it's very, very, very powerful. And maybe the third one, because the third one is very important, is about the number of women in executive position. So this was the first tool. We re-emitted a new one only based on the carbon KPI in 2023, and during the last summer we decided to work on another tool, a blue bond. In fact, it comes with discussion about how we can engage again ourselves reusing sustainable finance, and I have heard a lot about climate, about green, but in fact, the new green is blue, because we can see that, again, I have shared with you Mobile Water Solutions. It is one of our company who can provide solution when a company cannot have any more access to water. It is going to happen more and more, and I think we have not yet, we are not really conscious about the fact that it can have a very, very big impact. Some companies have realized it. Agricultural sector, for example, of course, is very, very aware about it. The beverage company are very, very aware about it. But I think more and more companies are going to realize that it is the new carbon. So we have decided to emit a blue bond. And I think it's very new. We work on the framework. Of course, we have used the taxonomy framework. We have not used yet the criteria, technical criteria, but we have chosen the different categories because we are submitted we are concerned by the taxonomy only in 2026. So we were running the first exercises and not totally ready to propose a total alignment with the taxonomy framework. But with this framework, in fact, we have two main categories: is water supply, water supply for drinking water, and also wastewater treatment, but also a category regarding desalination. At SOR, we don't want to do desalination for desalination, so we have identified precise KPI, precise criteria. We will go for desalination and using this blue bond only in water stress areas. only, of course, with a very, very powerful engagement regarding the energy and the renewable energy provision, and also regarding the brine management, because it is a very important subject regarding the impact of the biodiversity, particularly. And it was very, I think, a very good surprise for us, because this bond was really well welcome. Even it was a kind of a risk, because we are one of the first actor in the water sector emitted this kind of bond, and now we share, as we have done it for the SLB, but we share with our employees the importance of their work, because they will participate to the success of this bond. And in fact, it was a very again a subject of our people were very proud, in fact, about this emission. So yeah, I think we want to continue to be a very important actor in the sustainable finance, because we can see again how powerful it is operationally.
Thank you very much, Benedict. So you have mentioned about the sustainability-linked bond, which is in fact a new instrument that has been created during the last 10 years, and which creates a new need, which is to judge not only what is green, but what is the trajectory that people have. And in the recent years have emerged a new entity able to judge about the trajectories of corporates and taking a new, very important market share. It's SBTi. So Marco, you're around to tell us how you've managed that, what you're doing in that space, and where you want to go.
Yes, merci, Tanguy. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. It's times like this that I always wish I'd studied French in high school instead of German. But yeah, we'll have to do. I'll try to keep it short. Maybe we'll have some time for Q&A with the audience, as I know it's a long sit. So a decade after the Paris Agreement, emissions haven't gone down yet, and climate finance is not ending up where we need it to go, right? In the places where the emissions are, which is not, well, there's still some emissions in Europe, right? But the main emissions is not in Europe, and much of the debt capital market finance is ending up in Europe. At the same time, we've heard in the speeches from previous speakers about political headwinds, about regulatory uncertainty, mixed signals by governments and others. But I think it's important to note that climate science remains constant. It is telling us the same thing that has been telling us for the last decade, which is we need rapid decarbonization in the real economy if we want to have any chance, right, of staying below 1.5 degrees and staving off the worst catastrophic impacts of climate change. Now, you all know it's been 10 years since the Paris Climate Accord, but what you might not know, it's also 10 years since SBTi started as an initiative. And I say initiative because it's just over a year that we've actually become a separate legal entity. So yes, we're 10 years old, but at the same time, we're really, really young. And I think that paradox explains also some of the interesting dynamics that have been going on recently. But in that 10 years, we've just now established a big milestone, which is more than 10,000 companies either validated or committed to setting science-based targets. In the CAC 40, we have 73% validated. 30% of the Forbes 2000 have validated targets. And last year, we still saw, after everything that's going on around the world in 2024, we still saw a 66% growth of validations in Europe, and maybe even more interesting, because it kind of goes against the narrative that is currently blowing out of the United States, 60% validations in the United States. So I think it's very important to understand that there is a different story, there is an undercurrent, and I think it's been touched upon in multiple speeches as well, that is not talked about enough, right? And we've also talked a little bit about some, big names in the financial sector dropping out of some voluntary initiatives. At the same time, I want to say, we keep growing the number of financial institutions that have validated SBTi targets. Only a week ago, we validated one of Europe's biggest banks, the biggest bank of Italy, in Intesa San Paolo. And very soon, I can't yet share which one, we'll have another big, very big European bank validated. So I just wanted to say there is a different narrative possible. And I feel it is important to share that narrative, because otherwise we're all going down a bit of a negative mindset, which then results in a slowdown of climate action in a time that we need to accelerate. For now, I'll keep it at that, because I promise to try and keep it short.
Thank you very much, Marco. So I think the question that is, the title of the panel is, are we delivering in the debt capital market? So I would like maybe to ask a common question to all speakers. I think right now we say that we have delivered, all capital market have delivered a lot, but probably not enough yet. So I would like to ask you, what would you need right now? What would be your dream asset or your dream taxonomy or whatever in order to go further?
So, good question. Thanks, Tanguy. If I can take the lead?
Yeah.
I don't think we need any more taxonomy or new regulation, if I can say.
Really?
It's probably a bit provocative way to say it, but definitely I don't think so. I think we need more growth. That I think is very clear. At least in Europe, totally lack of growth is not a good environment to invest, and we need to invest in across the economy. And thank you. Across the economy, but I felt it was hurt anyway. For me, we need definitely an environment which is conducive of investment, so which stability on the regulation, no more stability. Simplified is even better, but definitely one about the environment. Stability also, on the outlook for fiscal. I think it's also very important, and it's not been so clear those last 2 years. So we need to continue with that. And even more important, last but very not least, real life projects. It's not about is there enough money, is there enough savings. It's very clear when you look at the macro environments, Europeans and like in other parts of the world, but Europeans tend to save a lot, and that's great. It's good because probably a sign that they're worried about the future, but there is savings, but we need more projects, more entrepreneurs, more developments to make sure that we can back them. It's really from the innovation, from the entrepreneurial, and equity that we can develop a sustainable economy, long-term innovation, and to have people daring to do it and to create the traction for the capital market.
So more investable green asset.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. What is your dream? Oh, sure.
Because, for example, in the water sector, we know that there are real assets. Network, we know that the need of investment for the improvement of the network is very big. In fact, the problem is the model. We have to find the right model, maybe a public-private model, because today it's at the level of the municipal decision to invest. So we need to find, I think, another model to be able to bring the investor and their risk part of the investment for the investor to go in this kind of reality. We know that we need it, but I think there is a gap between still you and maybe the operationality of the investment. But if I can share, not a dream, but in fact I think it's the next step we have to do. It's about the green, in fact, what we call here at our stage in our sector is the green infrastructure, but in the water sector. All what is about ecosystem, we have talked about nature-based solution. We can see that we are just still at the starting point, and what I understand is that we don't have really good metrics. It's very difficult to find KPI, impact KPI on this subject to be able to develop maybe some tool and reliable tool. But I think it's very important because we can see the interlink between the different, the ecosystem. Just one example, water, if we do wetlands, for example, it permits to have a water with better quality, meaning that we will use less chemicals to produce the drinkable water. So it's less operational cost for us, for example. So we really need it to be able to, in fact, even improve our operationality in the water sector. So yeah, I think I have seen some, weak signals, but we have to continue and improve in this perspective.
Thank you, Benedict. Paulina, what do we need to better deliver in the debt capital market?
Sorry. I agree with Jean-Baptiste. I think there are already a lot of tools on the capital market, and Benedict, you mentioned quite a lot of them. I really agree on the fact that, and I've heard other development banks saying, so we need more projects, but the question is how to identify those projects. When you don't have, for instance, a big network in Africa or in developing countries. So we are, again, already working on that. We believe that local banks have a strong role to play in helping identifying good projects, good clients, and to do that intermediary. So, but of course, we need for that technical assistance. That means public money, and there are not so much public money for development right now. You also mentioned regulatory barriers. That's why I said before that it is very important to engage in national dialogue and to provide public policy loans like development bank are already doing to create business-friendly conditions in the energy sector, in the water sector, in the transportation sector. And maybe one other thing, this is not about the capital market, but we talked a lot about regulation. We haven't talked about the prudential regulation, but of course the cost of risk is an issue because currently the prudential rules are quite punitive when investing in non-OECD countries and when investing in securitization funds, which are powerful instruments to drive capital flows towards emerging countries. So before asking the prudential regulators, which are, and I understand why, quite cautious about that, we need to demonstrate that the cost of risk maybe is overestimated in developing countries, at least with some counterpart and in some sectors. So we are trying to share information about our portfolio within the GEMS initiative. This is a global initiative with other development banks to try to demonstrate that the cost of risk is not that high, that our default rates are kept quite low in the project we are investing in. And after that, I don't know, maybe we could ask the prudential regulator to do just like we have a discount factor when investing in SMEs in Europe, because we think it is very important. We could think about a discount factor for investment in development finance project or in sustainable project in developing countries. This is very maybe utopist, I don't know, but there is surely something to be done on the prudential side, even if it won't solve all the problems we have for attracting more capital towards emerging countries.
So I will ask you the same question, Marco, but before that I will turn to Valérie. Are we allowed afterwards to take some questions from the audience? No? Okay. Okay, thank you, Valérie. So I will keep on asking questions then. Marco, what would be for you what we need in order to go further in this market?
Yes, thank you. So I think at this point in time, it is important to combine our strengths of the frameworks that are already out there, the initiatives that are already out there. And one very exciting example that I recently came across is a Euronext index that combines the ICMA principles with SBTI validations to create this list of investable bonds, basically making it easier to make that selection. And I hope, not just this example, but broader, right, through a focus on interoperability between SBTI, other initiatives, we're able to basically make it easier, especially now that, probably we'll see, we won't get the amount of sustainability data we were hoping for in the market. It's important to use these kind of other frameworks, other benchmarks, to be able to still make those investment decisions and make those choices into the right projects. So that's one. And then secondly, I think, it is very important to just acknowledge that the time of investing more in new fossil fuel projects needs to be over, needs to be done, right? So it's important, I think, for all financial institutions to disclose what they're currently doing, to halt certain financing of certain projects, and for some others to make sure that you try to transition them out, or if necessary, phase out. I think it is extremely important, and you can also find in our recent financial institutions near-term criteria, our fossil fuel finance method, and our financial institutions net zero standard, which will launch hopefully soon, will also include strong fossil fuel finance requirements. Because we cannot on the one hand say we need to upscale green finance without at the same time acting accordingly also with the other hand, so descaling fossil fuel finance. And finally, I would just, before I think we get to the end of this panel, I just want to emphasize that in the financial institutions net zero standard, which will launch soon, there will also be a dedicated not requirements, but dedicated recommendations for capital market activities, which I think would be really interesting for everyone in the room to take a look at. And we're also including insurance underwriting, which we've also touched upon today as an important financial activity to drive to drive decarbonization. So yeah. And with that, so we can't do questions here, but I would invite everyone, if you have questions, feel free to approach me. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the panelists for this insightful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanguy. And thank you to your panelists. I am Ibrahim Kobar, Head of Private Debt Strategy and Business Development at Natixis Investment Managers. I'm also co-chair of the ICMA Regional Committee France. This is a great pleasure for me to introduce the next topic. It's with great interest that we listened to the specialists who spoke about their role and mission that enable a financial market to consider and limit the impact of climate change. However, we are also keen to know about the future generation, the future generation thoughts and their concern about climate change. I am pleased to invite 3 young women on stage. They have accepted the challenge of discussing openly about this subject. Alina, Florie, Gabrielle, ladies, over to you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for being with us for this fireside chat. We're excited to engage in a conversation about how climate, diversity, and future generations are interconnected. Each of us, Florie, Gabrielle, and myself, will give you our perspective into these matters. And ladies, shall we start with a short round of introductions, maybe?
Sure, I can start. Very happy to be here. I'm Gabrielle Ferrat, working for Mirova, which is an asset manager dedicated to responsible investment, part of the Natixis and BPCE group. and we are managing both listed assets, fixed income, equity strategies, but also private assets, and around 30 billion euros under management as of today. And my role very quickly as ESG specialist is basically to support all portfolio strategies with ESG expertise, whether it's ESG analysis, engagement efforts, or also thematic research on various sustainability themes.
Hi, I'm Florie. I'm senior lawyer at CMS Francis Lefebvre in the capital markets team. I work mainly on the debt capital markets, covering all type of issuances and products, but also do a little bit of equity capital markets, and of course we love to cover products with ESG aspects.
I'm Melina Schopte-Fratz. I'm the fixed income product manager at Euronext. I'm working in the bond secondary market development team in charge of market microstructure and client relationship. And I'm also ICMA future leader representative for France. So our goal today is to exchange and explore how climate and diversity are shaping a more sustainable and inclusive future for the generations to come. And when I was thinking about this subject and preparing the fireside chat, my first thought was this: climate change is a very important topic for me, and also for the young adults that I met in my life. It is a topic that we will discuss in formal, but also informal settings. And I was curious to understand whether it's only my feeling or it's the key topic for the current young generation. And there is the latest European Parliament Youth Survey shows that young Europeans would like to put the climate topics at the top of EU agenda for the next 5 years. It was second most popular topic after the rising cost of living. So it is a concerning topic for our generation, and it's becoming more alarming looking at the current geopolitical landscape. What is your intake on that, Florie, Gabrielle?
Well, to be honest, when we first met, the three of us, to figure out what we were going to discuss today, Trump had just been elected, and we all felt pretty much depressed about the future of ESG as a critical component of political and corporate strategy. And as a matter of fact, a client of mine who was considering a new financing called me and told me, well, it might not be a priority for my top management and shareholders that such financing be ESG-based anymore. But then I guess we came to think about the young generation and also all of our friends and former colleagues who had changed career, especially after the COVID-19 crisis, and we realized that it was really important for all these people to find meaning in their job. And so we came to hope that while ESG is clearly experiencing turbulences, companies will still need to improve their sustainable impact if they want to be attractive to potential recruits and especially the new generation. And as a matter of fact, I met someone working in the aviation industry, and she told me that their sustainable strategy was increasingly being discussed while meeting people for job interviews. And she strongly felt that such an industry used to be very attractive to almost anyone because it was stable and thriving and prosperous. It was quite difficult nowadays to be still attractive when operating in such an industry.
Yeah, I feel like jumping in here because I think it's a story that I've heard a lot also and not an isolated case. Actually, I think it's even more a visible phenomenon for the young generation, the Gen Z, the people basically that are going to enter the job market. We've heard very engaged speeches from students from agri or engineering schools in France that were saying basically that they didn't want to play by the rules anymore, and that they didn't want to work for corporations that do not include climate commitments at the heart of their business. So I think it's a phenomenon that is here, and I was curious to look at the numbers and actually just find out that more than 70% of young adults, when they're going to choose where to work, actually they're taking into account the ESG commitments and sustainability commitments of an organization. So I think even though ESG can be having a hard time, maybe it's still very relevant for companies to continue to attract and to retain talent and to give a strong sense of purpose so that they will see higher engagement and lower turnover rates. And I think also maybe a reason why this, like you say, quest for meaningful work is so important for young generation is because I believe that climate change is also hitting on them the harder with, living in a world that is getting warmer and seeing all that biodiversity loss. I don't want to be pessimistic, but it's true that it's bringing a lot of, I think, anxiety and also pushing new issues around mental health that should be taken into account. And so, I think that for them and for the young generation, choosing an organization that will have strong commitments towards fighting climate change is really a way of action, like a path to be actors of change in the world they're going to live in. So.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I want to bound on the fact that you mentioned the anxiety, and we have this term of eco-anxiety. So the younger generation is feeling the weight of climate change, not only physically, but also emotionally a lot. However, if we look deeper, we can see that not everyone is impacted in the same way, right? Women in particularly hold different type of stress, what we call the mental load, the burden of planning, organizing, ensuring families' physical and emotional well-being. So whether it's in time of crisis or just in daily decision, the responsibility of navigating the climate uncertainty often will fall on the woman's shoulder. So women are significantly impacted by the climate change. I checked numbers again. The United Nations organization shows that during natural disasters, women and children are 14 times more likely to die than men. This is due to limited access to information, limited access to our resources, and also some societal norms. But this is not only a topic for developing countries, right? Also in developed countries, women will often lead the sustainable efforts of the family, reducing the waste, making eco-friendly decisions, ensuring sustainable consumption. So all this adds to a woman's mental load, which is sometimes unrecognized, unfortunately. So what I want to say here is that climate change and gender equality are interconnected and maybe could be fought in the same battle.
Thank you very much for pointing out that, well, the climate crisis is definitely not gender neutral, and the consequence to the fact that women are more likely to be impacted by the climate change and also that they are more sensible to this topic due to the role they generally play in society as caregivers and community builders, is that they tend to be more active in NGOs, charities, but also corporate position that that try to promote environmental sustainability. So I guess we can say that women are key to climate change and sustainable development. But then nowadays we might have reason to fear that their voice may not be heard, don't you think, Gabrielle?
Yeah, I think we definitely have reasons to fear that their voice won't be heard or won't be heard enough. And I think it's really crucial that they are. When I see indeed the backlash on diversity, equity, and inclusions in the US, when I see also the very fast development of AI tools that have tremendous opportunities, but if they are not developed safely and transparently can also exacerbate the existing gender bias, sometimes I feel quite afraid. But I also think that the fact that we're talking a lot about diversity today is also a right momentum to advocate even more for diversity. And I think we should also outline the positive here because there has been tremendous progress in the past years for gender diversity in organization. Looking back 10 years from now, we've seen that in terms of remuneration, women are catching up on men, with the gender pay gap in the US having decreased by 20% in 10 years. So that's definitely a good signal. We also see more and more representation of women in the executive committee for France and the organization of the CAC 40. In 3 years, there's been an increase of 5 percentage points of women sitting in executive committees. So things are definitely moving forward. And I think it's not only a question of if we want to see more diversity in an organization, because diversity is also quite financially material. If we look at studies, they continue to show that the companies that are the most diverse are actually the ones that are more likely to perform well financially. So I think it's an interesting angle to have. And I think climate change also is, physical climate risk, transition risk are really topics that are increasingly material financially. And so if we have companies that are diverse, that perform well, that are efficient, I think it's also a way to bring more innovation in how we're building adaptation and mitigation strategy, because climate change is such a diverse and complex problem that I think we need the viewpoints of everyone here, including women. And maybe to finish on a more personal note, because I think it's also why we've been invited to sit here, I'll say that personally, it's been very fulfilling for me to find spaces of solidarity between women, to be able to share about the excitement and the fear about the future, whether it is with my group of girlfriends or within the mentoring program I'm part of at work, or even in my associative life. And today with sitting here with you two, it's, I think, very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you very much and congratulations. That was really great to hear from you. And thank you for taking part of this exercise that depart from the written track. I'm now delighted to introduce you the last speaker of this conference, Ms. Cecilia Tam. Cecilia is head of the Energy Investment Unit at the International Energy Agency. IEA reports and data are the reference when talking about energy systems. The IEA flagship World Energy Outlook published on a yearly basis is the most authoritative global source of energy analysis and projection. So Cecilia, we can wait hearing from you.
Thank you. Oops. Thank you very much, Valerie, for the introduction and for the invitation to speak with you today. I know we're running a little late, and I basically stand between you and the cocktail. So what I'll try to do is... okay, that's fine. I'll try to take you through my presentation as quickly as possible. I might jump through some slides, and I was asked to provide this closing presentation without having heard any of the sessions. So I think what I'll try to do is use my presentation, but pull back in some of the discussions that I've heard over the course of this afternoon and this evening. So what I will do is highlight, use primarily the messages from the World Energy Outlook to reflect a little bit on progress we've seen in the energy sector over the last 10 years. I'll also provide some numbers from our World Energy Investment Report, which tracks all of the capital flows in the energy sector, but also try to get you excited about where some of the investment opportunities are going to lie in the energy sector. I think we've heard this afternoon a very striking statement from S&P saying that the net zero scenarios were no longer realistic. This is very unfortunate to hear. We don't have an opinion, or at least I don't have an opinion on this. We're here to provide ambition and scenario advice on what needs to happen if we want to achieve certain goals. And we see a lot of reasons to be optimistic, but the geopolitical situation at the same time also adds a certain layer of realism in terms of what we think and see might be going forward. The IEA scenario projections, we have medium-term projections that are for 5 years. The World Energy Outlook provides long-term projections out to 2050 as well. I will focus a lot of the numbers on what we've seen in the last 10 years, but also forecasting out what we think might need to happen for 2030 as well as 2035, since we are trying to reflect on the last 10 years of Paris. So what have we learned over the last 10 years since we reached that monumentous agreement at Paris and the Paris Agreement at COP, and what can we expect out for the next 10 years? So first of all, following the capital flows over the last 10 years in the energy sector, and what you can see here is that even despite that monumentous agreement with Paris and that commitment to a 1.5 degree trajectory, it wasn't really until the global pandemic that we were seeing a dramatic shift towards clean energy. So fossil fuel investments did decline since the signing of Paris, but we weren't really seeing a strong pickup in clean energy. The global pandemic really changed that. And last year, we saw and hit over 3 trillion in investments in the energy sector, with clean energy investments reaching about $2 trillion, with fossil fuels just over 1.1. So we're now at about 2 times invested in clean energy for each dollar that we invest in fossil fuels. So this is very encouraging, but it's not really fast enough to meet a 1.5 commitment. Now, some of the good news is that if you look at orange, these are investments in renewables and grids, which is critical to achieving a much more electrified electricity or energy system, which will be the underpinning of a net zero scenario. So that shift away from fossil fuels means that we need to be using electricity, which we know how to decarbonize, and which has been decarbonizing at pretty fast rates in terms of what that spending is on low emissions electricity generation. And in 2023, we were investing more in solar than in any other electricity generation technology. So these are all very positive and encouraging signs that we are making progress on transitions. And in 2024, we anticipate that about $500 billion will have invested in solar energy. This is a 4 times increase in just a decade. So it does show you that transitions can happen quite quickly in just 10 years. Since we signed Paris, we saw a quadrupling in solar investments, and we saw a drastic decline in the amount that was being invested in coal-fired power as well as in gas-fired generation. And we are also seeing renewed pickups in investments in wind and nuclear technologies as well. And looking only at some investment ratios, for every dollar that we're investing today in fossil fuel power, we are investing $10 in clean electricity generation. And that's only in the last decade. So in a decade, we can achieve quite a lot of progress. So if we turn to what is in the energy sector and some of the COP commitments, in Dubai at COP28, the world committed to 3 key milestones for the energy sector. That is a transitioning away from fossil fuels, a tripling in the amount of renewables capacity that will be added until 2030, and a doubling in the rate of energy efficiency improvements. And these are all 3 items that will be critical levers to hitting a net zero trajectory. Now, what does this mean for investment opportunities? A tripling in a renewable capacity means a doubling in the amount we'll be investing in renewable capacity. And a doubling in the rate of energy efficiency improvements means we need to triple the amount of investments into energy efficiency as well as into electrification. And on the renewable side, we're doing reasonably well. I already mentioned again that $500 billion we expect will be invested in 2024 in solar power, but also in other renewable technologies like wind and hydro, but also renewed pickups in nuclear investments as well. On the end-use side, things are much slower, but we do see some very good bright spots in investments in EVs, for example, and a lot of this is really going to be driven in China, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a few minutes. Now, I'm going to skip over a lot of this because this is really about what we see as critical trends in the energy sector. If we talk to countries, if we talk to a lot of firms, climate, as we have been mentioning, is not necessarily the driver of investments, particularly in emerging and developing countries. And this afternoon, a number of our speakers were referencing that we can only achieve the Paris commitment if we can see faster transitions and faster energy transitions in emerging and developing countries. So while we do see progress in advanced economies, we're not seeing as much invested in emerging and developing economies other than China. What drives investments in these parts of the world and will drive investments also in Europe, in North America, is about energy security. So a lot of the agency's work is also looking at how investments are being driven by increased interest for improving domestic energy security. And this will be a big driver of energy policy going forward. It has historically been a big driver of that transition to clean energy with different peaks in oil prices. And what we're seeing here is that we do see optimism that energy security for oil and gas is improving with much more spare capacity. But there are still geopolitical concerns that could relate to some disruptions here with certain pinch points for oil and gas with the Straits of Hormuz, creating potential supply disruptions in the future. But also, if we look at the supply of solar panels as well as batteries, we're very much dependent on one single supplier, which is China, which is the biggest supplier of both solar panels as well as batteries. So a lot of the investment decisions and a lot of the investments going forward will be in the name also of energy security and supply diversity. Now, if we look at the markets for clean energy, I think what's very interesting is that This is growing extremely rapidly. 10 years ago, the market for clean energy was about $200 billion. In 2023, this has increased to nearly $1 trillion at about $700 billion. Now, if we look at who's supplying that market, I've already mentioned a few times that China is really where we see some of the brightest spots in terms of manufacturing capacity, but also in overall spending in the clean energy sector, with about 60% of all of clean energy spending taking place only in one country, in China. China has also been the driver of electric vehicles. We see very bright spots in electric vehicles driven by investments in China. And it's interesting to look and reflect on what China has been able to achieve in just a decade. If we look at today, EVs represent 40% of all new vehicle sales in China today. That demonstrates that with the right types of policy, with the right types of industrial incentives, we can very quickly transition different parts of the real economy. And we see, this drive for more investments in the clean energy sector really growing. And this only represents, over the next decade, we see nearly a tripling in the value of the clean energy sector. China's role in this actually declines, with the US picking up its share. Europe remains pretty much constant at where it is today. And this is really a result of strong industrial policies linked to industrial development, but also sustainable development in different parts of the world. And Europe is asking a lot of itself about where its competitiveness will lie. We've had some conversations around that as well. Now, I want to quickly just show you a map of where the different manufacturing locations are. First of all, solar. This is pretty widely dispersed, but highly concentrated, as I already mentioned, in China. If we add wind manufacturing, you see a lot more blue dots, a little bit more manufacturing around the world, including in Europe, but also in parts of Latin America, also North America. And finally, if we look at electric vehicles and batteries, you also see quite a nice potential for investments around the world. And this is current manufacturing capacity. I'm not overlaying in this where we see investments coming in the future. So clearly, the drive for energy transition is also going to be accompanied by this benefits for countries through additional investments in manufacturing. So we're not only importing from China the investments that we need in the clean energy sector. Now, just quickly to talk about what's happening in the energy sector, looking at oil demand and oil usage. So what we see here is that current oil consumption is recovered from its pre-pandemic lows. But if you look historically, what was driving demand for oil over the last 10 years or so, that was coming originally from China with a lot of vehicles. Now, over the next 10 years, we actually see this shifting. I already mentioned that 40% of all new car sales in China are EVs. So this shift to a much more electrified mobility is actually going to be what's creating that peaking in oil demand in our steppes. And that's our most conservative scenario going forward. And this future demand for oil really be coming from other emerging countries, namely from India, as well as from Southeast Asia. And you'll see here that oil demand in China is pretty much flat. And that's because of that very rapid shift towards electric mobility that we also see picking up in different parts of the world, but is the strongest, as mentioned, in China. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty as to the pace of e-mobility. We've seen a lot of press articles about slowdowns and rolling back on commitments and targets in Europe, in North America. But even with a slower EV uptake, our scenarios do still show that the shape of the curve remains the same. We still anticipate a peaking in oil demand in the next sort of 5 years or so. Now, what happens if EV pickup is faster, with rapidly declining costs in batteries and EV costs becoming quite competitive? In China alone, it's actually, for small vehicles, cheaper to purchase an electric vehicle than an internal combustion engine. So this is where innovation, technology, manufacturing can really drive change in markets. This increase in urbanization also means that we hopefully will be selling more smaller vehicles than SUVs, but this is will be depending on consumer behavior, and so far, people still prefer their SUVs in many markets. But if we do see a faster pickup in EVs, we could actually get to a peaking earlier and a faster decline in the use of oil. Now, just a couple of words about the speed of that transition. And what we see is that this is really a story of increased electrification and this new age of electricity. Over the last 10 years, electricity demand has been growing at twice the rate of all energy sector. And over the next decade, we anticipate that shift to continue and to accelerate as well as we electrify not only transport, but also industry, particularly light industry, as well as the building sector. Now, if we look at where electricity demand is going to be coming from and where this supply will be, historically and over the last 10 years, it's really been driven by developments in China and other emerging economies. In advanced economies, electricity demand has been pretty flat. Over the next decade, we anticipate that China will reduce the growth a bit because that country is going to be emerging, and advanced economies will actually be picking up in electricity demand because of this increase in electrification across end uses. And other emerging and developing economies, India, Southeast Asia, Africa, will continue to develop and require much more electricity. Now, a lot of that growth will be coming from conventional, what we are calling conventional electricity demand. This is demand from buildings, from light industry, but we also see a growing interest and a growing demand coming from new sources. This includes EVs, heat pumps, but also demand from data centers. So this drive towards AI and the digitalization of everything is also creating a lot of demand for electricity, and the IEA will continue to do quite a bit of analysis around how AI is going to be driving future electricity demand. And in April, we'll be releasing a new report on AI and energy and AI. We've recently released a report on nuclear. I'm not going to say a lot in the interest of time, but we do see quite a lot of potential growth in investments, and again here driven by innovation with SMRs. You can see here in dark blue, and a lot of the SMR interest is really coming from digitalization as well and the tech sector, with a lot of new entrants to investments in things like nuclear, but also more broadly in renewables. Now, just to end my presentation, coming back to what we were talking about around reflecting on Paris and the last 10 years and what we can expect over the next 10 years. So even in our most conservative scenario, which follows current policy settings, we see a peaking in overall emissions and that eventual decline. Clearly, this is not going to be enough to meet a net zero trajectory, and hence we have the COP28 full implementation case. And as a reminder, what that is that's the tripling in renewable capacity additions, it's the doubling in the rate of energy efficiency, and that transitioning away from fossil fuels. And that last measure is really around increasing investments in low emission fuels, green hydrogen, other ammonia as well, investments in nuclear, but also investments in methane abatement because it is an extremely potent gas. And we need to also think about reducing emissions in the fossil fuel industry, and methane is a big part of that. So I'm going to leave the presentation here. Happy to take any questions or discuss this further over the cocktail. Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much, Cecilia. I think that was the best way to conclude this, this conference. I hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank, obviously, all the speakers, all the distinguished panelists. Special thanks for SNP for offering the cocktail.